Hello, my name is Frank Genovese. I live in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and I'm the former graduate dean at Babson College, and I've done some things in my life that are kind of important, like I was advisor to the Central Bank of Jordan, etc., etc. In other words, I expect I'm sensible and knowledgeable. The so-called system, which is not a system, it's a melange in the United States, really spent a great deal of money in the act of causing my wife to die. And this happened for a series of items. In the first place, it took forever to have her properly diagnosed. It started in the fall of 2005. My wife was having, I think, some mild memory loss, and then she had a couple of falls, and in one case she complained about a stiff neck, and we went to our doctor at Harvard Pilgrim, and we didn't see the doctor, we saw the nurse practitioner, and she gave her some muscle relaxants and things of that sort. This was, in other words, not a great thorough diagnosis and so on. But this continued, and then in the following year, 2006, she was getting progressively worse. She had lost her appetite. She was not eating, and one day she was sitting on the couch in our living room, all cuddled up in a fetal position, and I took her to the emergency room of Newton Wellesley Hospital. They said she was suffering from atrial fibrillation, and they calmed that down and then sent us home the next day. I protested sending us home, saying, "What's wrong with her? This is ridiculous," etc. And they said, "Oh, well, you talked to your general practitioner." Now, I frankly don't know if that means they just don't want it going on there, because I do think when you go to an emergency room, they ought to do a thorough job. But anyway, the next day, she was back in the emergency room with the same problems, and that morning I got to Harvard Pilgrim and saw our general practitioner, who we'd had for years, and said, "I don't want her to dismiss it. It's ridiculous what they're doing. This woman needs treatment," etc. And he said, "Well, you know, I've been thinking about Eleanor." Of course, this is after quite a long while. He had about 5 or 6 months to think about her. And you tell them to do a SED test here. And he gave me a little note addressed to the doctor in charge of the emergency room at Newton Wellesley. So I hand-carried a note over to him which said, "Run a SED test." That's a sedimentation test, and it checks your blood condition and so on. And sure enough, it showed up that she was having a problem with her blood. The white blood cells were too abundant, etc., etc. But there's a really final test to make sure of that, where they do a very mild biopsy on your temple, and here they discovered, yes, with the biopsy, she had what is called temporal arteritis, sometimes polymyalgia rheumatica. Now, knowing that, if they'd known that early, it would have been a matter of just taking medication for maybe a year or so, and that probably would have taken care of it, and she'd be alive today. But since this had been going on for some time, she had deteriorated and so on. So her heart, which had always been solid, now was in atrial fibrillation, as I said, and so on. But anyway, they kept her in Newton Wellesley Hospital now, and they treated her for this, and she was feeling better, but she started having great sharp stomach pains, and that's something that is often associated with this disease of temporal arteritis. So they had to do an operation to remove part of her small bowel, because with this blockage and not eating, etc., I guess there was some gangrene or something of that sort that they had to take care of. But they took care of that now. But she was better after that and so on. So they said, well, now we can send her to a nursing home. One of the people who does this was a very pleasant woman, and she said, well, since she has caught MRSA, what is it, methicillin-resistant staph infection at Newton Wellesley, it's harder to get her into a nursing home, and she kept her there an extra day or so while she negotiated a single room at Sherrill House. Well, that was very nice of her, and we were pleased, and we went to Sherrill House, but we got there, and by the time we got there, it was a little after 5, and we discovered there was no single room. In other words, clerical errors, misinformation. Why don't they put things in writing? If you ship parcels, you specify maybe what's in them and where they're going and so on. Here we ship people between facilities without having paperwork in the hands of somebody, the patient, or somebody who's trying to take care of the patient, like the husband in this case. But anyway, when we got there, I had no one to complain to except the nurse on duty, and that was, of course, I was very upset, and I probably created a bad impression because I thought that a single room was supposed to be rather important because of the infection she had gotten courtesy of Newton Wellesley Hospital. But anyway, they did put her in a room with another woman, and the room was actually pretty good, etc. The other woman was fine, etc. Now and again there was a noisy television, etc., etc., but this is relatively minor. The care at this place was really pretty good. A doctor introduced himself to me, and I assumed this is the person we had to deal with. And it turned out to be the person we had to deal with. And very shortly after she got in, they phoned me and said she'd fallen in the bathroom. Of course, they shouldn't let her fall in the bathroom. We should have had proper paperwork. So there's some questions about management and malfeasance or misfeasance or something there, or negligence, whatever.